Hello, welcome to the latest episode of Through the Pages. I'm bringing a great one to you today. I just finished this book this morning and I've still been just kind of an odd mood from it, so I realized probably just need to do a video and kind of talk about it a bit, both for me and for you. So today, talking about JFK and the Unspeakable by James Douglas. And so this book is all about his assassination. And so I think I've honestly been in an odd mood the last 2 or 3 weeks about reading this, just in general. Just because it's simultaneously, obviously, in the most basic sense, he dies. I knew coming into it, this story we've been told is not true. And that at the core of it, it was all just about killing someone who was, in my opinion, doing very good. And so it was harder than I thought it would be to read. But at the same time, there's so much new in it, so much that I haven't heard, that it's riveting at the same time. You're hearing these stories within a story for the first time. This witness's testimony, this person who is there, and all these. I'm going to try to stay focused on the book and not get lost in the subject too much. Because it's a topic there's probably hundreds of books about. JFK in particular, I think, more than almost any president. I think there's the most amount of books on him. And so I was kind of reaching a point where it was I wanted to read a Kennedy bio. I don't know if you call this a bio, but just something about him, my interest was being piqued. Probably all around the same time his nephew announced running for president. Saw the JFK movie that what's his name did, Oliver Stone, and also the more recent documentary. And so I feel like I had a good primer coming into this, so I felt all right, not that it wouldn't be as heavy as of a read, but I'm not just I don't know, I felt a little more ready for a book of this magnitude. It's a thick one, but I will say a quarter of it is indexed and everything, so it's really 400 pages. That being said, it's dense. There's no dialogue, and because this is such an outstandingly well-researched book, it doesn't have a great flow sometimes, and that's not a knock at all. That's not a demerit. You absolutely need that level of research to put out a book like this for it to be worth a damn. And so for every instance, it's so backed up, this person who is working at this office as of this date passed along to this person who is known to do this based on this Freedom of Information Act request cited here. And it just there's obviously all the citations at the back, the finer details, but as you're going, there's not room to wonder but who was this person, or why are they talking to that? Everything is very detailed. And so in the course of 2 pages, you may simultaneously feel I didn't get very far, but also there's a whole world, and here this 2 pages could be a book, so I found the book to be phenomenal in the sense that it balanced being rigorously well researched with also not falling into any other stories. It has a very narrow focus, which I think is key, which it might be odd for people to hear on a 400-page book that the focus is narrow, but I shudder to say things more than any other president. I was going to say he's one of the most dynamic presidents we've had, just because of so many aspects to his life, but I don't know the first several dozen presidents super well. So I don't know their social context, but I will say with JFK, you could write a whole other book and never touch on anything they touched on in this. Just his social life, his early life, his life in the army. They briefly touch on his time in the war just as a backdrop for his vantage point on peace, which I think is vital. I think if we were going to learn some JFK stuff in school, we should have learned that, instead of the story we were told. But he to delve into the subject a little bit, he's a man I admire greatly. Whatever your thoughts are on it, if you're left, right, whatever the fuck, like he was a great man. Like that shouldn't even be debatable. He, I don't know of another person who I'd be like, I would rather have had him in that seat in 1963. All time and logistics aside, like there's no mind I would have rather had in that position. We were so close, and what this story tells, along with just so much, is the relationship between him and Nikita Khrushchev and how they were in such similar but radically different positions. And I think this nuance, this kind of tiptoeing and diplomacy, I think that shows more courage than telling war stories. And I think in school we just learn about valor and the good and bad and the simple sort of, as his nephew is relaying that, like comic book characterizations. And so he did a lot of good by not doing what everyone around him wanted him to do. And Nikita Khrushchev was in the same way. So they're both, what would be viewed as polar opposites in the economic kind of political structure of their countries, but similar boats that they were surrounded by war hawks. They were surrounded by people who wanted them to go, who were in their ears saying, like, you need to strike first. They're going to do it. Go, hit them, strike. And saying, I don't think that's the move. And both of them recognize that in one another and realize, all right, we'll work this thing out. And so everything from the Bay of Pigs to the Cuban Missile Crisis, Vietnam, Saigon, like all of these, Indonesia, all these areas where he was facing these crises that would define a presidency, but he had so many of them all at once. They basically did this whole thing without even talking about race. Like in most people's eyes, that would define JFK's presidency. But this was a book about peace. And I think the thing that makes this book really soar for me, that was honestly a little, wasn't hitting in the beginning, was that it's rooted in essentially spirituality or faith, however you want to define that. Thomas Merton, this monk in the time when this was going on, I don't know how he rose to such prominence, but he was writing letters to like very high up people in like geopolitics, and they were regarded very highly. Like, so he would send out these letters, and it was a big deal, but he basically had a very watchful eye on Kennedy and was the first one to say the title of the book, essentially, where they got from the Unspeakable, is forecasting that he's pushing for peace enough that they're marking him for death. Like he's not gonna last. He's a kink in their gears. And it's not totally distilled through Thomas Merton's eyes, but James Douglas tethers back to that in a way that helps add heart to a book that could be very much sort of callous government conspiracy and come from almost an angry and vengeful point, which it's hard not to have that, because it's, he's a great man. When I finished this morning, I don't know why, I was really sad. Like, and I knew it was coming. I knew everything. It's not like the book was so linear that the last page, like, and then he died. Like, it wasn't like that. It was just like the magnitude and the scope of this conspiracy within our own borders, not a foreign country that did this thing. They didn't even try to do that. They didn't try to send him to another country and then have it happen there and kind of play it off as that. It happened right here in plain sight. They did it when he was sitting next to his wife 2 months after his infant son died at 39 hours old while John's holding his finger. And there's people who have more power than almost anyone on the planet that said, we need to get him out. And because he was pushing for peace. Because he wouldn't go along with our Cold War, the Vietnam War, because he was making friends with the enemies and not in a treasonous way, just in the common sense, like, wouldn't that be the ultimate goal way? His speech at American University, which they have the whole thing in the back, it's quoted throughout the book, as basically being him saying, like, I'm done with this Cold War shit. Like, this is pointless. We're going nowhere. It's just who can make a bigger bomb. Oh, you have a bigger one, now we'll make a bigger. And it's a road to an end of the world. It's frightening that there was one man sounding the alarm in that administration. That essentially there was one stalwart who held back us just obliterating a country which gets a horrible rap, has done bad things, has had leaders that do presently bad things, but our history classes will not tell the honest story that Russia gave more in World War II, helped to end World War II more than any other country. They lost 20 million people fighting for the same thing we were fighting for. They lost 1/3 of their country fighting for the same thing we were fighting for, and then we gave them the middle finger at the end because their economic system is different than ours. And through it all, it's good, but we can't really side with that. Like, this tension was held because there are people in our government who want a large-scale war. And he recognized that, and he fought back on it, and they killed him for it. And this book details, without question, that it was not a lone shooter. It doesn't go as far to say this is the person who was pulling the trigger, because at the end of the day, it doesn't fucking matter. It was the organization that created the circumstances for this to happen. All the prep work, creating the scapegoat of Lee Harvey Oswald, creating the circumstances and the drive, everything is so methodical so that they can have less peace on Earth. And that, if we were taught that in schools, would create quite a problem. That I think we would have a little more revolution in the streets, a little more questioning of authority. And I think it's really important that books like this, movies and documentaries and everything get out, because it's not long gone. The people who did it are certainly gone at this point just because of time, but that ethic, that ability within the CIA and other intelligence agencies to do whatever the fuck they want is baked into the cake. And it's time we collectively kind of question that. That's our tax out. That's people working on our behalf. And it's silly to say that because I know they're holding way more cards than we are. Like, it's ridiculous, and I'm rambling at this point, but it's important to get information like this, or one of the last books I reviewed, Shock Doctrine by Naomi Klein, also just fell off the shelf, Why We Can't Wait, Martin Luther King. Books like this help us to understand politics, not in the sense of what senator said what little congressman made a tweet about some dumb shit today, about how power works, about West versus East, about the military-industrial complex. We get so fatigued with politics because by design, we're shown the dumbest surface-level shit on it, exhausted by it, and then we want to just move on. The complex stuff, the inner workings, that's what gets me most fired up about politics. That's what makes me want to get engaged and talk. So I think books like this are important for our own education, because we got a bullshit education in school. It's not to say that everything in that history book didn't happen. It's just half-truths. This story applies to Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, RFK. There's so much we can learn from books like this, and yes, you got to pick wisely. There's some out there that might go a little further in the conspiratorial lanes, may not back their things up as much. That is why I'm reviewing this book. That's why I'm excited to tell you. If you want to learn about this subject, I find books for me are the way to do it. I watched the documentary and the movie. Afterwards, I couldn't recount as much of it. It's too fast for me. I also don't take notes in them, is probably a big factor in it. A lot of notes in this. I feel like this finally got me the story. So if you've heard the JFK story, lone shooter from the book depository, and thought, that doesn't sound quite right, why don't you learn the right story from James Douglas here. If you want more videos like this, follow, subscribe. If you have any other books along these lines to recommend, certainly drop those in the comments. Thank you for watching.